Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations in Horror, the podcast. I want to thank you all for joining us this week. My name is Kevin L. Powers. I am the owner, operator of Something Wicked Entertainment and Events, and welcome to this podcast in which I delve deep into the many different facets of the horror genre, from many different decades to different subgenres to all genres. We like to take a look at all the different types of horror content that is out there. One of the mandates of my tenure here for 2025 is to delve deep into stuff that we just didn't touch upon last year, which was our first year of producing the show. That being said, we are dedicating a month to releasing episodes that focus on horror-themed comic book movies, and which is odd in and of itself because most people don't consider that there are a lot of horror-themed comic book movies, but there are, and we're just going to take a small dip into the pool of this subgenre. And before I get to the title of the movie we're going to talk about today, I actually want to introduce my special guest for the show. That is Philip Ray. I want to thank you, Philip Ray, for joining us on the show this week.
Thank you for having me.
And he's going to help me talk about a comic book movie, which I absolutely have read all the comic books for, and I absolutely love this movie. But he, on the other hand, because we've talked about this a little bit earlier, has never read the comic book, but he has seen some of the movies, and he's seen the remake of this movie. That movie that we are going to be talking about is The Crow, starring Brandon Lee. Now, the original Crow, not the recent one, but I have not seen the recent one, but, Philip has, and he's going to probably touch upon that later in the show. But for right now, we're going to talk about the original Crow movie. Philip, you're going to have to tell me a little bit about how you came to see this movie and what your first impressions were.
So, I actually, before I did this, sign up for this episode was my motivation to see The Crow, because I did not see The Crow when it originally came out. I had originally not had decided to see. I had not seen The Crow when it first came out, and I always was like curious of wanting to see it, and then this, along with seeing the reboot and stuff, I wanted to see the original before I saw the reboot, so I had a good comparison between the two. So,
okay, so if you've never heard of The Crow, which is kind of hard to say in this day and age, considering that it's most infamously remembered for being the film in which Brandon Lee was killed while making the film. So that's one of the stories that we may pop up to, but I'm probably not going to. I'm just trying to stay as far away from that as possible. I saw the movie because I saw the movie when it originally came out at the theater because I was a Brandon Lee fan from having seen him in Rapid Fire and Showdown in Little Tokyo, and knowing that he was Bruce Lee's son. So that was the original reason why I saw the movie. I had not read the comic book at that time. I was familiar with the comic book, but I had not read it. I did not actually read the comic books until after the second movie came out. I can't even remember what the second movie was called. City of Angels. The Crow, City of Angels. After that, I became a huge James O'Barr fan because I read the original comic book, and slowly over the years got to reading all of the comic books that are based around the Crow, the original Crow concept. That being said, this film is very different than the sequels, of which the less said the better. I know there are the Crow City of Angels, the Crow Salvation, I can't remember the last one.
It's Wicked Prayer.
Wicked Prayer, which is actually named after a limited series comic book, but takes almost nothing from it. It was not a very good adaptation. And then, of course, the remake, which Philip has seen, but I have not seen. But I did remember seeing this at the theater when it first came out and was completely amazed at how good the movie was because it was so different from any of the other films out there at the time, including any other comic book movies at the time. Back then when this came out, we were not inundated with the Marvel movies and DC movies coming out every year, 3 to 4 films per year. It was a rarity for comic book movies to come out, and this was a darker one. if you've read the comic book, you know that it's a very dark comic book story. Oh, so Philip, you having just seen this film recently, you're gonna have a different aspect on this movie than I would, since I grew up reading the or watching the movie. Um, what were your, this movie mixes a lot of different genres in it. How and director Alex I never get his name right, but he was relatively new director at the time he did this.
Yes, I believe. Yeah, this was his second movie. His first movie being actually, so this was his director debut, really, because before that he did The Spirits of the Air, which was an indie movie.
So I never saw that one. I know him mostly for this and Dark City. He has done some other great movies, but these are the two movies that I know best for.
He also did iRobot.
Yes, but I don't watch iRobot.
He also did the very bad Gods of Egypt movie.
You know what? That was a fun, stupid movie. But he did that musical movie in between that was about the band who thought they were good or were horrible, which is funny as shit. I can't remember the name.
Oh, he also did The Knowing.
Yeah, no, God, I forgot about Knowing. Oh,
Garbage Days is what you're thinking
that's
of.
it. That movie was hilarious as shit. But that movie came and went so fast to the box office. It was, yeah. I don't think he'd ever go back to do another movie like that. But getting back to The Crow, there's a lot of dark elements in this film, and it also plays into the atmosphere and the style. Because if you've seen the director's other film, Dark City, you will see this exact same style that he starts here and develops in that film. How do you think some of these elements work in the film's favor, since you've only seen this film and the original and the remake and not have read the comic book?
So The Crow is it's a little bit of a product of its time, to a point of like it was when it came out, it was around the time of like that was really when the goth period was coming out, So like same thing with the comics, it was really harping on that kind of metal goth phase. The Sandman was came out around that time as well, so it really was harkening on that type of feel and stuff. So it's definitely a product of its time in that sense. So I the world is very Tim Burton like a little bit, and it's funny because if you watch the movie and you watch Tim Burton's Batman and stuff that came out
89, I believe.
Yeah, it came out in 89 and stuff. It is very you could definitely see there was a lot of inspiration a little bit on it with the world itself that they portray and stuff at the time and stuff. I'm a little there's some goods and bads about this. I know I will personally talk a little bit about the Brandon Lee stuff, because it is very interesting, because there is a thing about this movie with the Brandon Lee stuff that it's like, if Brandon Lee had not passed away. For people who don't know, Brandon Lee, who is also he's the son of Bruce Lee, who Bruce Lee tragically died while filming a movie, and same thing, Brandon Lee also tragically died during this movie when a prop gun fatally wounded him and stuff, and during the filming, and they had to basically, to do the rest of the movie, they had to use stunt doubles and digital effects to kind of CGI his face in and stuff. Would this movie have been as successful if Brandon Lee had not passed away? And that's an interesting thing, that when I was watching the movie, I had that thought of wanting to look at it from that aspect and stuff. And There's a mixture of that. I think there's a mixture of the answer is yes and the answer is no. I do think there's a lot about this movie that's really good. Brandon Lee, again, himself was perfect casting and he really carries the movie. I think there's a lot too with some of the side characters. Ernie Hudson, who plays the sergeant, him and his chemistry with Brandon Lee is really good. And the girl who plays Sarah, the Rochelle Davis, she's great in all of her scenes. And all three of them, I think, are really the heart of the movie. A lot of it, I think they do a well job. But there is a lot of hokiness in this movie. This movie is very hokey and campy at times, especially with the villain and the henchmen. They get really silly a lot of the time. I mean, you've got the villains literally smoking out with eyeballs and stuff. Like, it's campy. It's very campy and stuff. And that is something that like is very much, and it's a 90s camp. It's very much a 90s camp that I think that a modern day, like watching a modern day, some of that does not really transition well at times. But there are some of it that I think but some, again, a lot of stuff that revolves around the Crow character and stuff. I think all of that is done very well because, again, the Crow story is, he is killed. He and his girlfriend are killed by these gangsters, and he is brought back basically as a spirit of vengeance to a point to get revenge for him and his girlfriend and stuff. And that's a very tragic story, but he's not fully like serious the entire time. Like, there's a lot of playfulness in Brandon Lee's portrayal of the Crow, and that kind of campiness I think works well with the movie. It's a lot. I will say probably the weakest part I found in the movie was the villain's campiness with it. But I do think there is a lot of this movie that is good, and I think a lot of that comes into your lead three being the Crow, the Sergeant, and the little girl Sarah.
So that's what it's interesting that you say that. Mostly because when the movie originally came out, it was a rated R film. It was darker than most any of the other earlier comic book movies at the time, and like Batman, it did emulate the fact that you're in an unnamed city in this unnamed time period, and they're not celebrating Halloween; they're celebrating Devil's Night. It's a very dark comic book, and the fact that that you're seeing it now is so interesting to me because you call it camp, but it was definitely not camp in '94 when this movie came out at all. This was darker than anything any of the other people had ever seen at the time. And whether or not Brandon Lee died or not, I think this film still would have been popular because that's what people wanted at the time. It's kind of like watching the remake now. Is people want to know a lot more about, from what I've been told, a lot more about everything that happens before he dies. Eric Draven dies. They want to know more about him, but the comic book doesn't give you those details. They're parceled through as flashbacks for a reason. It's like it starts you off right in the medias res, right in the middle of everything happening on it. You have to catch up with Eric Draven's character, who has not lost his humanity, which is why he treats the Sarah character the way he does. But he also is a spirit of vengeance, kind of like Ghost Rider. If Ghost Rider had been made in the 90s like this was, you would have a very, very similar thing because the Ghost Rider comic book at the time with the Danny Ketch character had the same look and feeling as the Crow character because that's what people liked in those darker characters. Now we call it, everyone calls it goth, and it's something that's passe now, and you think, oh, it's goth, it's passe. I guarantee you, when James O'Barr wrote the original Crow, he wasn't thinking of God. He wrote. It's kind of like watching Hellraiser by Clive Barker when he directed that. He wasn't thinking necessarily, oh, it's gonna has to be S&M. He's thinking it has to be risque. It's a version of hell and sex and violence, and that's what he was bringing to it. But nowadays, you watch Hellraiser, and the first thing that comes to mind is there's a lot of S&M type of imagery in there. I think it's very important to look at it like you do, because you're right. As popular as this movie was when it came out, its history has been marred by the sequels that came after it. They want, because this one made so much money, was so popular when it came out, they wanted to make a quick sequel, which is what they did with City of Angels. And then after that, that one did okay. Didn't do like bang up business. They did the third movie, which kind of went straight to video almost. It was almost disappeared. I think that's the one with Eric Mabius and Kirsten Dunst before she really hit it big. And then, of course, The Wicked Prayer had Edward Furlong in it and David Boreanaz before he became huge and big. And so you have all these different types of actors that they tried to elevate The Crow because the comic books were so different. James O'Barr created different stories based around all this stuff. And I mean, you're very curious to see how the remake does it. But the ideal of the Crow, and he's just a spirit of vengeance, the comic books are very simple. They're very simple. They're all about mood, atmosphere. And I think that's what David Proyas brings to this movie is a lot of mood and atmosphere to it. And that's one thing that is like, it's hard to, unless you're Tim Burton, because you brought up a good director. Unless you're Tim Burton, it's hard to get away with keeping to do that throughout your entire career as a director. You mentioned his other movies, which is the I, Robot and Knowing, and they don't look anything like this movie or Dark City at all. But Tim Burton's movies, pretty much doesn't matter what he does. They pretty much are a Tim Burton movie, and you can watch them and see that his style doesn't really change that much throughout his career, which is very interesting because I had forgotten he did Knowing and he did I, Robot.
Yeah, no, definitely as a director, he's kind of moved all over the place. And so I won't go into too much spoiler territories, but definitely, again, this movie, again, like this movie, because like Brandon Lee, before he was casted in this movie, like he did some movies like you mentioned earlier, but like he hadn't hit the full mainstream. This movie really was going to be his movie, and you watch this movie and you see, oh, if he had made it through, he would have been a big star after this movie because he had so much personality. And you watch the reboot and stuff, and Bill Skarsgård's a good actor, but again, it's I think The Crow is such a time capsule to a point because, again, I think it worked so well at the time it came out because it was just in the middle of the kind of grunge, goth era a little bit during that time that just is not really as prominent nowadays in the modern time. And even during, again, even with the sequels and stuff, and that's why the sequels weren't as well received because it's kind of gone past that time now where it's not as so much in the forefront as much as it was during that time and stuff. And again, and part two of that, and that's why I think a lot of the sequels and the reboot lose that because they don't understand that like what made The Crow interesting was, again, like it's the emotional part of it. And I think they all kind of lose that. Like one of the biggest issues I had with the remake was you don't really get like they speed through Eric Draven and his girlfriend's like thing that when it happens you're not invested in it. And the problem with the remake is they take so long for him to embrace kind of like the revenge about him going on revenge that that by the time he finally gets there, you kind of just don't care. But with the original movie and stuff, again, like when he like you like that's one thing. Even though I was talking about how kind of goofy the villains are, they do a good thing of meanly getting you into that revenge flick of where you're like, okay, let's go. I'm ready to see the Crow kill these characters and stuff.
Yeah.
Like the clear line, uh, through line with that, and I think that's something that like. But again, I think the character, I mean, the Crow to a point is, and I haven't read the comics too much, but I think the Crow is a little bit because again, the origins of the Crow comics was it was written by James O'Brien, who wrote it as a coping mechanism for his uh, wife's unexpected death to a drunk driver, and so this was his coping mechanism. So the point, the Crow is kind of not a flat character, but kind of like a insert character to a point. He's not. He's meant really for the emotional parts, and a lot about it is coping and stuff. And so you have to have a lot of like again acting wise, you have to have a really strong actor who's able to help do that. And I think that's another reason why I think this movie is so well because the unfortunate tragedy of Brandon Lee to a point is like there are some scenes that if you watch and you know this actor is gone and stuff, and there's some lines he delivers. Again, it's very symbolic. You have an actor who passed away, and the character is about a character who passes away and comes back. And so you have emotional scenes with like the Crow with Sarah talking about, like, hey, I might be gone. It's like, hey, I'm sorry, I'm going to disappear and stuff like that, that I think impacts so much more knowing the real life things with that. But that being said, I think even if you take that out, I think Brandon Lee did such a great job of making you get again, it's the emotional part. And I think that's where a lot of these movies failed is that the Crow is a tragedy. He's a tragic character. So you have to play up that tragedy, the emotional part. It's not just about, oh, look, let's look at the cool guy do some cool action and stuff. Like, you look at a lot of the Taken movies,
Mhm.
anything Jason Statham does nowadays, it's the revenge flicks. And the problem is like you're just seeing a character go and kill other people and you don't really care. The difference between that kind of character and the Crow character is there's a lot of emotion with the Crow character because of the fact that it was meant to be a coping mechanism for the author, and to us as the audience watching this movie, is a coping mechanism knowing this good actor is gone, but also it's a coping mechanism about just a tragic character that, again, because I think if it wasn't for how good how good Brandon Lee was able to portray it, and also again how good Ernie Hudson and the actress who plays Sarah, Rosha Davis, like were able to play off scenes with them. I think the movie wouldn't have been strong if you take those characters. If this movie was a pure revenge flick and you didn't have the Sarah character, I don't think this movie would have been as strong.
No, the Sarah character you have to have in there because that's the only person from his previous life that he could connect with. Like those scenes with her and those scenes where he's playing his music alone on the rooftop. Those things are the human scenes that you see in between everyone dying or before he becomes a spirit of vengeance, so to speak. It gives more weight to the fact that this guy is essentially a vigilante who's killing people, and the opposite of Batman, who goes after people but doesn't kill them. You have to have those scenes in there because those are the only way the audience can actually empathize with the main character. Plus, we all know he's already dead, and he eventually will die again. Like he's not supposed to survive after this. Once his vengeance is done, he will be reunited with his loved one, and he will go back to being dead again. Those are tragic ideals to think about for a comic book hero because essentially they have one purpose and then they're dead again. I mean, those are when you think about those heavy themes, and you see this at the very end of the film. It's those things like that that make the movie endearing and tragic because, in theory, there shouldn't be a Crow 2. Or in the case of this, the Eric character was extended into I believe Stairway to Heaven is the television show that they did. I've never seen the television show. I've never been able to see the television show yet. I just know it exists.
And the thing too is like the idea with the Crow character is, and I know that they've done that where they've expanded the like there's been more than one Crow.
Yes.
There's and that's at least generally a good thing of what some of these sequels did was they had different Crow characters and stuff. So you didn't have it's only Eric Draven the entire time. And that's the unfortunate thing the reboot does is that they try to just retell the Eric Draven story when it's like you have so many again like the Crow character has had many different carriers and stuff. Like kind of like Ghost Rider. Ghost Rider is a great example of how like there's been multiple people, there's been Ghost Rider, there's been multiple Crows.
Mhm.
Uh and it's just but it's like the so it's like there should be more uh like you should be able they should be able to expand more on the Crow characters and not just keep doing Eric's story, but again everyone likes to go to the Eric story because he's the Johnny Blaze. He's the one who made him most famous, so everyone's like, oh, let's go back to that character. But like some of the other like Crow characters from the comics I know have very tragic backstories that easily could have their own story. But again, I think a lot of times what happens is they learn the wrong lessons from the
Mhm.
first movie.
I'm going to add to that because I wasn't sure if I was going to bring this up, but you kind of highlighted some of this for me. Because the thing I believe this can only happen now. I believe because I think it's Dan Trachtenberg who did the Predator movie, I believe. Um, because it was so far removed from the Predator movies, it works. Um, with the Crow movies, they could easily do the exact same thing because James O'Barr and the other people he had help him craft more stories have done stories about the Crow from different time periods, different races, different. There's female crows. There's the one of my favorites took place during World War II, and it was a shit. I can't even think of the word. It was a Jewish person who was killed and comes back to avenge his death on Nazis. These stories are amazing stories that could be made, but you know why they don't get made? Because studios want to rely on the tried and true, and they don't want to do period films. I think what the director with Prey did was he opened the floodgates for these type of alternative stories to be told, and I was hoping that before we got this recent Crow remake, and there was the rumors of who was it that was supposed to be the Crow before? Was it Jason Momoa?
Yeah, some
Or,
more. I mean, there was so many casting. Bradley Cooper, Luke Evans, Jake Holston, and then Jason Momoa. Jason Momoa was the one who got the furthest in. They had a lot. You can look online. You can find pictures of Jason Momoa in the makeup and stuff. And again, I think he would have been a fantastic choice. Bill
yeah.
Skarsgård's okay, but Jason Momoa should have definitely have been the Crow.
Well, if they had done Wicked Prayer like the comic book, it would have been a female Crow. They could have gone with that, but they've kind of stayed with the tried and true and never deviated, thinking that that's what people want to watch. I think The Crow is such a unique concept that because the character dies at the end, you could bring lots of different stories into it and create different star vehicles, different time periods, different everything, and you could be successful with it. It's sad that they just keep making the same thing over and over again, but you can't repeat what happened with the first one. You're right. Brandon Lee unfortunately passed, and that gave the film a little bit more gravitas than it probably would have had he survived. But it was still a good movie. They just can't repeat that.
Yeah, they just can't repeat that. I think the best way to do The Crow now is to do a TV series, to maybe to do an anthology series called The Crow, and it's every episode is a different character that becomes the Crow. And I think I'm sorry, Kevin, I'm gonna do this to you, and this is gonna date when this is recorded.
No.
Today they released a Predator.
Yeah, I
Hulu,
saw.
yeah, they announced they're doing a Predator. Basically, it looks like an anthology to a point where you're seeing the Predators. It's everything the Predator fans have wanted. They wanted predators in different time periods
Mhm.
fighting different people, and that's what all predator fans have been wanting, and that's something the Crow should do. That is the best way to continue on with the Crow IP, is to do that. Have an anthology you where you again you cover these different characters as they become the Crow and stuff, and that's how you do, and that's the best way to do it nowadays, to properly adapt the source material.
Yeah, no, I agree with you in there. I was always, since I've read every Crow comic book, I've seen all the different types of stuff that James LeBar and his cast of other creators have created, and they've come up with some really cool shit. But it's a mixed opportunity because, like you said, they go back to Eric Draven's story because that's the IP that they own. I do not. I think no, City of Angels was became an adapted comic book. It was not originally a comic book, and then of course Salvation was never anything that I'm aware of. And Wicked Prayer, like I said, was based or inspired by a comic book with a Native American female. I think she was pregnant, so she was avenging her unborn child and herself, which I thought was a really fucking cool concept, but gets lost in that movie because they changed it to a male guy who just dates a Native American. I was like, you're like, fuck shit. I think there's fear back then when these movies were being made, because comic book movies weren't popular. Horror, and they got less horrifying with each subsequent sequel. There's less, like this first one, there's a lot of horror elements in it. It looks like a horror movie. It's rated R. It goes that way. It gets less with each one of the subsequent films, to where it's almost a caricature of the first film. Same story, different characters, but they don't really expand on anything. So they become like a copy of a copy of a copy. Worse returns as they go. And that's sad because horror fans really dug this movie. This movie was hugely popular, not just with general audiences, but horror fans, goth people, and everyone else in between. This movie kind of helped, bridge a big, huge divide between audiences. Not only because of the fact that Brandon Lee passed away and everyone was curious, but it genuinely was a really good movie. And I think you hit upon it when you said that it's because of Brandon Lee's character's relationship with the other characters. There's those quiet moments in this movie when he has with the Ernie Hudson's cop and with Sarah that humanizes him, whereas in the other movies you have those scenes, but they don't really ring true, I guess is the best way of putting it.
Yeah, and it's the thing too of like how good the actors, again,
Yeah.
like in the sequels and stuff, they didn't really have that strong of actors to really carry it and stuff, because like again, like as we see with the sequels, like the Crow storyline you have to really tiptoe over and stuff, and if not, it just doesn't hit well. And so you have to have strong actors to be able to really properly like to make the products good and stuff.
Did you see any of the sequels?
I have not seen the sequels.
So I will tell you this: Vincent Perez as the Crow is god awful. He was not good in that one at all. And neither was I think his name is Richard Brooks as the villain. He's campy in that one. Guys from Law and Order who he miscast as the villain in that one. And then of course the third one had Eric Mabius, who is a really good underrated actor, who was saddled with a straight to DVD film that just didn't hit with anyone. It's unfortunate because he's actually really good in the movie. Rickett Pryor just sucks. Dude, I don't think there's a redeeming quality in that movie between Edward Furlong and David Boreanaz and the rest of the cast. I think it's just bad. Um, the other thing I have to mention about this movie is the amazing soundtrack and musical score by was it Graham Revell who did the musical score for this one?
I think so. It's funny because I was listening to people talk about it, and it was, I mean, another reason why this movie was so successful is like you said, the score, the producer to get all of these bands. It was hard. It was a very hard sell. Like there's an interviews you can find where he was talking about cultivating this soundtrack and the score because originally, there was a lot of the band, like he wanted to make sure that the bands they got were very authentic and stuff, and a lot of them didn't know. There were some people that were fan of The Crow and were willing to do it, but there were other people who was like, I don't know what this is, and I don't know why I should invest in it, and he fought very hard to get all the bands in this, and that's again the reason why it works so well. I mean, there's multiple times throughout the story where there's actual, like, the bands are playing in the story themselves, not just providing the score, but it really is like, again, like they made sure to make everything authentic to the story that they're trying to tell, the mood they were trying to tell.
So the soundtrack for this movie was extremely successful when the movie came out. It was hugely popular, and it fits this movie. Unfortunately, the soundtracks for the subsequent movies all suck. The soundtrack is kind of like a catch-22. The movie helps sell the soundtrack helps sell the movie on this movie, I believe, because in the 90s when this came out, that type of music was really popular, despite the fact it still had this indie fringe to it. Like it wasn't pop music, but it had this indie rock type of fringe to it, and so it kind of crossed over because the movie was so damn successful, and the soundtrack was hugely successful. I usually follow soundtracks when they're pretty successful, and Graham Revell, it was he who scored the music. I was like, I had to think about it for a second because I hadn't heard the score in a while. Because I have the score for this movie. I have a lot of his scores because he's amazing. And he's done a lot of comic book movies, by the way. So sometimes I forget which comic book movies he did and which ones he hasn't done. But that was a huge selling point for this. The music was played everywhere. The movie, it was hugely successful. And it was the 90s, early 90s. So you're right. There was a lot of people who dug this type of thing. It probably was hard. The Crow was not a very popular comic book at the time the movie was being made. I think the movie's success helped the comic book become more successful because in the 90s, movie studios didn't just go to Marvel and DC to ask for properties to make fucking movies. They kind of went everywhere. Anything. I mean, you have Barbed Wire from Dark Horse Comics being made into a movie, Tank Girl. You had all these titles being made into movies at that time where most people had never read the comics or even heard of them. I hadn't read Tank Girl when the movie came out. I hadn't read Barbed Wire when the movie came out. These were all new to me just as they were for most of the audiences out there. And like I said, I hadn't read The Crow until after the second movie. I just had never read it.
Yeah, it's funny because both The Crow and Sandman came out around the same time. Both had the same similar feel, but like The Crow was lucky enough to get a faithful adaptation, like a good adaptation from the get-go. And then you look at something like The Sandman, that it took them until 2022 to get a good adaptation in the first place, and a good adaptation. And stuff, but and both of them came at the same time and stuff. And the big thing and again, The Crow is under Image Comics, but it was not one of the well-known Image comics. There was
The Crow wasn't originally Image though.
That's right. It eventually got adapted. It was kind of its own thing for a while, so it
It was
didn't get.
independent comic book.
Yeah, it was an independent comic book, so it because of that, like it had even it was had even bigger like had even a bigger thing to try to climb to try
Mhm.
to like
Yeah.
to get adapted to get seen by a big audience. So it's really kind of crazy to a point that it even happened like it did.
Well, I think it becomes something like, yeah. Okay, so I had to go back and find my dates. So this was about as popular at the time as when a studio, New Line Cinema, decided to take hedge their bets and make an adaptation of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in the beginning of the 90s, which was also an independently produced comic book that no one had really heard about until the damn movie came out. It's one of those things where they were just in it's the 90s, dude. The 90s was such a crazy time period where they were just taking everything that was popular or possibly popular and seeing if it worked.
And yeah, and like you said, and it's funny because, like you said, with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, it is the comics were independent,
Mm-hmm.
and then the film adaptation is also an independent film. It is people think, oh, it must have been something like, some big company. It's like, no, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle was an independent movie. It was the highest grossing at the time in 1990, and stuff.
New
So
Line Cinema was not a big company back then. It was not the house that Freddie built. Yeah.
yeah.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle was a film that I guarantee you no one expected it to do anything. But thankfully for people like me, I had been reading Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from the very beginning, and I still am a huge fan, just like I am with The Crow. Whenever and I met James O'Barr. I actually met him and had a conversation for him with several hours actually because he's a cool dude, and he loves to talk about his work. He doesn't work as fast as he used to, and stuff like The Crow, he licenses off sometimes to other creatives to continue more stories and stuff. Um, but he still works independently with his other properties that he does at his own pace because he can because The Crow was so successful, and unfortunately, he still make a little check after every time he decided to make a sequel, which allows him the freedom to be able to do whatever he wants, which cannot be said for a lot of creative comic book artists. So that's good. And he does it. He keeps it dark. If you read the comics, any of them, they are dark. They are horror with they're a comic book superhero with horror elements in them, which is why it's so refreshing to talk about a film like this. Um,
It's a little fun fact, talking about a different world. When James O'Barr was first, dealing with the potential adaptation of the story, the first script he was handed to him was for this to be adapted as a musical with Michael Jackson being playing the Crow.
Dang. Ay, ay, ay.
Uh, yeah, he very quickly was like, "No, I'm not gonna do that."
Those are people who just don't understand the material when it comes out, uh, which is fine because I see that as the same people who decided that it was a good idea to do a movie based on the Superman character Steel, but not actually use the origin story of the character from the comic books because it's Shaquille O'Neal. Uh, the less said about that superhero movie, the better. It's god awful. Thankfully, I've only ever seen it once and never bothered to watch it again. And that is not a movie, thankfully, a horror movie we will ever be revisiting here, guys, girls out there listening to the podcast. Uh,
It is horror, but not in a sense of the conventional sense of a horror movie. It's a horror to watch it.
yeah, but like I said, I can't remember when that movie came out, but they, they were. I wouldn't be surprised if they came out after uh, Spawn and
Yeah.
Blade.
So Steel came out the same year Spawn did.
Them trying to come up with more African American themed superhero movies because some of these were hits. Like, Blade was huge because Wesley Snipes was in it, and of course, they thought that Shaquille O'Neal was going to be the next big star. He had like 2 or 3 movies, and Steel was one of them, and it was god awful.
Hmm. So yeah, I mean, Crow was one of the. If you think about it, yeah, I mean, if you think about it too, with Tim Burton's Batman and stuff, that came out. Uh, I have to wonder too a little bit of how if the Tim Burton's Batman had some influence too on the Crow a little bit on at least in the sense of or what helped like the Batman kind of helped walk so the Crow could run a little bit in the sense of getting a gothic kind of character because originally Batman was not a gothic character, but Tim Burton's interpretation of Batman was a little more gothic, and so I'm it's kind of interesting to think about that, if Batman potentially opened the door a little bit for the Crow to kind of walk a little bit more for to be able to do a more gothic character. I mean, and again, the fact that the movie is rated R2 is pretty unheard of. And again, it was a financial success too. Like, uh, unlike some of the other ones we just talked about with like Steel and Spawn. Well, Spawn was a financial success.
Mm-hmm.
But again, even Spawn, that was a PG-13 versus, The Crow, which was rated R, and again, they were able to make its money. It was a financial success and stuff that really you wouldn't think so at that time. The take that type of risk in so many ways.
Yeah, the '90s were a weird time period. You had regular horror films that were being watered down. The slasher genre became less effective because it was getting watered down. But then you had films like this coming out, which could be rated R because they weren't considered really horror movies. But then again, they were not really considered superhero movies either because most people didn't realize it was based on a comic book. I know when I saw The Crow at the theater, I know I knew of the comic book, never read it. But none of my friends knew it was a comic book. They just saw it as a Brandon Lee cool ass fucking movie. um, so it's one of those things where when you watch these movies, you kind of wonder what the mentality was for audiences back then. I wanted to look up something real quick while we're talking, but one of the things that I had to think about was yes, it came out in '89, which was the first version of the Punisher with Dolph Lundgren, which did not do well. But then he also was not trying to sell it as a comic book movie either. He doesn't wear the suit. He doesn't really go by the name. He doesn't do any of that stuff. He goes by, I think he's Frank Castle though. But they tried as hard as possible not to sell it as a comic book movie. And of course, there are people out there who remember the original 1990 Captain America film that was supposed to go to the theater, but was considered that it was so bad that they just dumped it to the television eventually. I can't remember when it was actually officially released, but I do remember that after Batman was released, they had the posters for Captain America at the theater. Said, I think either summer or coming soon or something. I don't remember exactly what it said, but Batman was so huge that everyone wanted to jump on the bandwagon to come up with the next big comic book movie. But when you're looking at Batman and telling audiences about Batman, Tim Burton was trying to erase the ideal of the television campy Batman show, because that's what most people knew about Batman. And he made it as dark and brooding as he possibly could without it going too far in the horror territory. And then you have stuff like this one, and you have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which was popular by accident because after that first movie, they didn't go dark with any of the other movies. They lightened that shit up. They realized kids were watching this shit. It's like, oh shit, we gotta make this lighter.
Yeah, because also at that time they were like, oh well, let's go, it became the fad of the toys. We
Mm-hmm.
want
Toys,
to
the
start
cartoon,
selling.
and all that type of stuff. Kids
Yeah.
were into this stuff, and they were like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, let's hold it back a little bit."
I mean, that's what's funny about stuff like during this time, like Rambo, RoboCop, like even though the original movies were rated R, they started trying to like kidify a little bit so they can get, so you can have the kids playing with the RoboCop, and it's very funny. Another fun fact, also talking about, the superhero stuff at the time. The Crow came out the same month as the unreleased Fantastic Four movie.
Ah,
That really bad one that never saw the light of day was originally going to come out this around the same month as The Crow.
when did The Crow come out?
The Crow came out in May 13th of 1994. So,
Okay, so also that came out that also had the same aesthetic as this. Another comic book movie was The Shadow, which I guarantee you no one fucking remembers The Shadow, with Alec Baldwin in it. That came out the exact same fucking year, and that was very deep in this darker type of mentality. And I remember that because I always thought that movie was horrible. I thought some of the stuff in it was kind of cool, but I thought it was horrible. And in another indie title was The Shadow. Very old. They thought that people who actually remember the original Shadow was going to go see this. Kids were going to see this, and no kids remembered who the fuck the Shadow was. The Shadow was so far removed from the rest of them. And then, of course, my last movie I'm going to add here is another forgotten movie, which is The Phantom from '96, which tried to lighten everything up instead of making it as swashbuckling and dark as the original comic book were. I always found that movie hilarious. I don't think that anyone knew what type of movies was going to hit with audiences. I think that the Crow, this first Crow, was such a movie that just it was a lightning in the bottle. Like you couldn't get that again. You got it by accident with the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Wasn't expected to be a huge hit. Wasn't expected to do anything, but it caught that lightning in the bottle, which never happened with any of the sequels. Like no one fucking cares about the second, third. Did they do a fourth one? I can't even remember anymore.
I think they only did three.
Okay. Oh, Turtles in Time. That was the third one. Yes, they only did three. But no one remembers any of that shit. They only remember the first one. And they never have gone back to that darkness the first one had. The same as with this Crow. They never went back to the darkness this one had. Not just in the aesthetics and the look and feeling of it, but also the story aspects. It's the lightning in the bottle effect. It doesn't happen that often. Even the Blade movie, which came out in '98, couldn't catch it. That was more popular because of Wesley Snipes. And
Yeah, it's funny. You know what? Another lightning in a bottle moment. I fully agree, and I think, in some of that does. I think that also has to do with Brandon Lee's death a little bit because then it became such a cult thing where everyone wanted to see it. But another lightning in a bottle comic book adaptation that was a little bit horror, but the adaptation did a reverse was The Mask. The
Mm-hmm.
Mask also came out that year, and again, it's based on the famous Mask story, and that was another that was financially, it did well. It was uh, the fourth highest grossing of that year, and again, that was another lightning in the bottle that they never were able to catch that in any sequel that they did with that.
Yeah, it's also kind of hard with The Mask because the comic book is much darker than the movie ever did.
Yeah.
Yeah, The Mask. I've read some of the Mask comics. I haven't read a lot of them. I've been trying to make myself go back and reread those because I remember when they were originally released by Dark Horse Comics. But the movie, I think, is much better because of Jim Carrey.
It was definitely a vehicle for Jim Carrey, just kind of like The Crow. It was a vehicle
Yeah,
for Brandon Lee.
yeah. I think I agree with you on that one. I mean, I think though you brought up another good one where I think that had it not been Jim Carrey in the movie, I don't think The Mask would have done nearly as well. Like I keep forgetting that Cameron Diaz was even in that movie. No one cares. No one remembers. But Jim Carrey, yeah, that's one of those things that it is a yeah. Yeah, that's a good one to bring up because that's another independent Dark Horse comic. I did not read the comic before I saw the movie on that either. I read the comic years after that damn movie came out. I mean, years, and I've never seen the sequel.
It's not good. But yeah, I mean, like, same deal of like, I mean, 1994 was a good year for Jim Carrey in general. He had three big hits that, but yeah, I mean, but that's and that's the thing is, I think the circling back to The Crow with that, it's like again, I think the reason The Crow works so well because again, at the end of the day, was vehicle for a very talented actor in Brandon Lee, and it's just like if you don't have, and so like, and that's why such a lightning bottle is you're not gonna you're not gonna find another actor like that with a good script at the same time.
No, I think you'd have to go so far to the left of what they did in that one. It's kind of like the difference between watching Tim Burton's Batman and watching Joel Schumacher's Batman Forever. The only way to get out of what Tim Burton created in his first two Batmans is to go so far the other direction that it's ridiculous. And we all know Joel Schumacher is not a bad director, but what he did was he went back to the television show aesthetic. He just didn't have the whip, bang, boom, pop fucking things popping up. But pretty much Batman Forever and Batman and Robin were that. We all missed the Tim Burton version. Batman Returns is going to be the only fucking Christmas themed, depressing ass Batman film ever made.
Mm-hmm.
A Christmas movie that came out during the summer. I know people forget that. A Christmas movie that came out during the summer. But it was depressing. But those films, and like this one, are driven by the director, Alex Proyas. And he was young and he was inexperienced, and he kind of I think that helped him create this film and helped him create Dark City, which is a much more realized film, but also a really dark movie. But he never went back to that after this. It's rare to have those type of films made in this day and age. I was trying to think of some other directors who could do that. Guillermo del Toro did it with his two Hellboys. But I can't think of any other directors who put their signature stamp on a comic book movie, because Hellboys also has horror elements in them.
Yep.
But not even, can't think of his name, who directed the Hellboy, the third Hellboy movie. Oh, he directed fucking The Descent in Dog Soldiers, a bunch of great movies, but then he directed Hellboy 3, and I can't remember what the hell his name is. Oh, it sucks. I can't remember his name. But it's hard.
You're talking about the rebooted Hellboy?
Yeah, the third Hellboy, the one.
Neil Marsh.
Neil Marshall. Yeah, he did. He has a great style with his movies. Doomsday, The Descent, all these movies that he's done, and yet he couldn't figure out Hellboy.
Well, and I think that also has a lot to say too of like, I think there was a little bit of, you look at the Marvel movies today and stuff, and there was, and now, I think that was an issue also that came about with the remake of The Crow, was now it just feels like there's a lot of studio interference. There's a certain way they want things to go and stuff. You see that all the time with the Marvel movies. There's not a lot of creativity, but I think back then in the 90s and stuff, you had stuff like Spawn, you had stuff like The Mask, you had stuff like The Crow. That all feels different, and I think that's because back then the studios, it feels like they gave them a little more, gave the directors like an actual ability to do stuff, like because comic books hadn't hit that like really popular. Like we got a little bit of that. We've seen examples with that, like with Batman again, like Tim Burton was able to do what he wanted to do and with no interference. And then we get into the sequels, and then the studio goes, "Oh, this is making money," and then they taint it and stuff. But there's a lot. I think that's what's have to say a lot with some of these early stuff was, the studios didn't know what if it was going to be successful or not, so they didn't really put their hands in the pie, and that really allowed the directors to put in their signatures into
Mhm.
it.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree 100%. I think if anything about these 90s superhero movies is that there was such a variety in the types of movies we were being offered. And it's a shame that we don't have that now. Everywhere you turn, they keep saying, "Oh well, we hired this director to do this superhero movie, and it's going to be their style." And then you watch it, and it's like it seems like every other Kevin Feige superhero Marvel film. I
Yeah.
don't see a signature style in anything. It's kind of like people who say the Russos do an amazing job, and I'm like, they do a good job, but all their movies feel just like any other Marvel movie, and all their movies outside of Marvel feel just like any other Marvel movie. I don't see a style that differentiates their movies from anyone else's movies. Um, and I've watched a lot of Russo brothers movies, and I'm like, I don't see a style. They've done their most prominent films for Marvel. They've taken that style and applied it to what they do now. It doesn't make they're not Martin Scorsese. You watch a Martin Scorsese film and you know you're watching a Martin Scorsese film. You know, he could be doing a movie like Silence, Flower, or The Irishman, and you could still see the difference, the movie from each movie, but they're still his movies. I don't see that, and we're in a time now where every film, these comic book movies, and these movies designed to be huge blockbusters, all feel the same. It's unfortunate. The 90s was a great time to explore different things for superhero movies. We, as horror fans, got our version of a superhero movie. I can't think of a superhero movie in the last 10 years that actually would appeal to most horror fans.
Yeah, there's not really
Not even Werewolf by Night. I think Werewolf by Night is still mainstream. I don't think that.
yeah, there's not. I mean, I think the closest and it's not even horror really. I mean, I guess like closest might be like the sand like what we've seen in the television side of things, stuff like The Boys and Invincible and The Sandman. Like again, The Sandman finally got a proper adaptation on Netflix, and like I watched it, and it's great. It's beautiful. It was really it's not fully horror, but it
It,
is.
Sandman's not horror. Sandman's fantasy. It's not.
Yeah.
But I think the closest we're going to get is the one movie that isn't even based on the comic book, and that was Brightburn. I think
Yeah.
the closest we got is Brightburn, and that's not based on the comic book.
Nope.
All right. So, Philip, any final words on The Crow?
Yeah, I mean basically it is a product of its time. It's lightning in the bottle. It's not, again, as the remake clearly showed, which everyone kind of knew was going to happen, is you can't really recreate it. And I think a lot of that, I think this movie will always be uh, mystified a little bit because of the death of Brandon Lee, and you can't as much, and you can't really separate the two. And I think it does accentuate the movie a lot. The movie's good regardless of it, but I think that definitely, like, again, that kind of puts that really kind of full circles the movie a lot of sense. Again, the tragedy is it's very tragic what happened in the end, but I mean, again, the movie is very much it's so interesting. It really is just a capsule that's just no matter how much the studio is going to want to like break it open and try to do it again, maybe they'll try it again in 15, 20 years and fail again. I think I think this original Crow movie will always stand the test of time, and I don't think anything's going to be able to really usurp it and be a better adaptation.
No, no, I agree with you. I kind of see this like I see the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie. No one, no one's, no studio, because now it's a studio property, will ever try and create what the first original film did. They're going to try and make it too mainstream, or they're going to try and make it too much like a CGI fest, like the Michael Bay produced films did, or like the recent animated version of it, which I hated. Sorry, guys, if you like that Mutant Mayhem crap, I hated that fucking movie. Couldn't stand it. Because I'm a turtle fan and they got everything wrong. They got everything wrong. Other than them being teenagers, they got everything else wrong. But that goes with this growing time. They needed to adapt and change it for a new audience, and I understand that. I think The Crow, and only you can attest to that because you've seen the remake, is did the remake actually make a film that was worth a modern audience who may never have even seen the original and not have read any comic books? If it was successful in that regard, then maybe it was successful. I don't know.
It's not. It's the problem with the remake is that it feels like it feels like an attempt to do a 90s movie but in a modern era. It's not even 90s. It feels like a lot of people have said, and I agree, is it feels like those early 2000s. Like you look at Daredevil, you look at it feels more Blade 2. It feels more like those type of uh superhero movie. So it's not good. Like there's one good scene in the entire movie, but other than that, it feels like a 2000s comic book movie, and it really loses any like if you saw that version, you would never read the comics at all.
Okay. That's a good point to say that, because the only reason why I read the comics is because I loved the first movie so much.
Yeah, and the thing is, it deviates too a lot. The problem is they try to modernize it, and kind of like with my early topic about like why The Crow worked so well at the time was because at that time that was really relevant. The goth era during that time was really on a high, so it spoke to a lot of people. The problem is nowadays, the remake came out, I think 2024.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yes, it came in 2024. Now it kind of tried to do a little bit like the Hot Topic goth. It's the joke I made when I was watching it. It's like it's trying to be the Hot Topic goth, and the problem is that's not as relevant nowadays. It's not as high. It's not as, we talked again about the original Crow's soundtrack being so good and taking the relevant bands of that time. And then you watch this Crow. I mean, you watch the trailer and you've got Post Malone. So it's like, that's not. So it's like, okay, what are you trying? What demographic are you trying to hit? It's like you're trying to do a rap. You're trying to do like again. The soundtrack is all over the place. It's not really trying to really settle on anything relevant. So it's just not. Again, it didn't know what it wanted to do.
I'll say this. I'll say this, and this will probably get me some slack for saying this, but if I would, me being an African American, if I was to do a Crow film, I would definitely do a Crow film that took place during the Jim Crow South days, and you have a crow who was hanged, and he comes back for vengeance against the people who hanged him. That would be a story no one's ever told anywhere, and it would be something different and relevant, and you just build into those themes and you can come up with something really fucking cool. That's what I think The Crow needs. Like I said, the World War II one with the Nazis and the Jews, that comic book was fucking amazing. Or the one about the pregnant woman who is avenging her unborn child and her own death. Well, actually, no, she's avenging the soul of her unborn child, not her own death. That's what makes this one so interesting, because she's not doing both of them. She's doing the unborn child's death. And I thought that was cool. that's a different story. And that's even relevant to today's time because of all of the whole abortion thing and everything else that's going on in the world right now. That would be something relevant for today's audience to make it even more chilling and interesting. That's
Oh yeah, there's a Crow. They did a Crow adaptations called the Lazarus Heart, in that story it revolves around homophobia and transphobia and stuff. Again, like that's the thing you can adapt today because it's very relevant today and stuff. Like the good thing with the Crow and I loved your premise with that is, and that's the thing with the Crow is that the whole idea, I mean, it really writes itself. So, but again, you get the problem with studios of being like, oh, let's focus on what was successful instead of focusing on the ideal of it.
Maybe I will write that whole slave one. That sounds like I can get away with that. I
It's
can,
sad that like the thing that really continued to propel the Crow into relevance is the wrestler Sting, like doing the Crow makeup for the longest time after the Crow. That was what really kept the Crow continuing on the mainstream for the longest time after it, for a while at least.
yeah, that was the other thing that I hate. I'm gonna add this one last thing before we head towards the end now. But the remake, the makeup for Skarsgård when he's a crow looked very bland and
Yes.
very non-distinct, and I was like, huh. Like in the comic book, the stuff, the way they put everything on their face, because each crow is different, is a part of their personality, and that's the other thing I liked about the Native American one because she put her tattoo on here that was very relevant to her Native American heritage, and I thought that's fucking cool. That stuff that's part of the story. That's the cool shit. And I just didn't see much with the Bill Skarsgård character one. It just looked bland to me. So
Yeah, it very much again it read too much of like the Jared Leto a little bit, Jared Leto Joker type, the Juggalo type deal that again and that character is not it's not that in the story, so it's just like yeah, it's not the best. Again, I think yeah, not the
all
best
right,
interpretation.
all right, Philip. All right, so we've been scoring our movies. That's a new thing we're gonna do now. From 1 to 5 being one being a very poor movie to five being an excellent movie. Where on our scale do you place The Crow?
Um, for me, it's a little tough. I think I personally would put it as I would put it as a 4. Uh I think the movie's really good. Again, I do think that kind of the campiness a little bit with the villains gets a little hokey at times, at least for me. But again, the heart, and they take a lot of the movie too, unfortunately. But the heart moments with Brandon Lee and the Sergeant and the Sarah character helps really elevate it and stuff. And it's something that like if you haven't seen it, I definitely recommend seeing it.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to rate it 4.5. I almost would do a 5, but you'd have to understand the mentality I was when I saw this as a kid. Um, and the fact I probably saw this 20, 30 times. I've not seen this movie in years. I've not. So everyone listening, I usually watch the movies before we discuss them again. I have not watched this movie in about a decade, but that's because I've seen it like 30 or 40 times growing up. I've listened to the soundtrack repeatedly at least 2 to 3 to 4 or 5 times every year. I still listen to the soundtrack. It's one of my favorite soundtracks of all time. I listen to the Graham Revell score. It's one of my favorite scores that he's ever done. Like these are things that have influenced me my entire adult life growing up from having seen the original movie. Had the movie not come out and me not loved it so much, I would have never read all the comic books. Would have never had the chance to meet James O'Barr and sit down with him and discuss his work, his career and stuff. This was a very influential movie for me. So it's fun for me to listen to someone like Philip, who is just now watching it for the first time because he doesn't have that history for the film like I do. So I give it a 4.5. The only reason why I don't give it a 5 is because I think, like a Godzilla movie with me, I think my experience and my general love of this kind of clouds my critical thinking of it. This is like Evil Dead 2 or Army of Darkness. I give those movies such high regards, but knowing that they're guilty pleasures and films I can watch and rewatch a billion times and never get bored. They may not be the greatest critical movies, but they're movies that I honestly have seen more times than anyone ever should see those movies. With that, I want to thank you, Philip, for joining us on Conversations of Horror to discuss The Crow. It's been very interesting discussing this movie, especially because we come to it from two different paths. I always love to discuss movies like that because it gives our audience an idea of sometimes when I've seen the movie when it very first comes out versus someone who's didn't see it until recently. And there is this is what 30 years ago, 30 years now.
Yeah.
In between these movies, 30 plus years in between these movies. So yeah, there's a huge difference in when I originally saw the theater and when you're just now watching it. So with that, for everyone out there, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation in horror. I hope you'll go back and check out some of the other previous episodes we've done. Make sure to check out any of our episodes this month that focus on superhero comic book movies with the horror theme in it, since that's our theme for this month. Make sure to check out our regular episodes every Wednesday at 8 a.m. and special episodes Mondays at 8 a.m. From all of us at Something Wicked Entertainment, we wish you a pleasant day. Conversations in Horror is a Broken Lighthouse Pictures production, written, produced, and directed by Kevin L. Powers, executive producer Kelly A. Inoka. All contents and material from this episode of Conversations in Horror is copyright 2025 Broken Lighthouse Pictures.